Hello, I'm Micheal Tabb, and we're at the Nashville Film Institute here in Music City. Today, our special guest is producer James Simpson. James, let's talk a little bit about your background and how you got into the industry.
Well, I went to drama school in London, somewhere called the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, which is one of the top 3 kind of acting and drama schools in London.
In the world, actually.
Yeah. And I spent 3 years there learning that I didn't want to be an actor.
Of course.
I maybe could have done it slightly faster, but
you fully explored the option.
Yes. But what it taught me was, like everything is in film, it's only when you try something out do you realise what it is. It taught me how actors work, because I was one, and that stood me in great stead, both as a producer and director, to understand how actors need to be treated, and everyone is an individual. Each of them are very volatile, because by nature of the beast, you're asking actors to put themselves on the line, to portray something, and give themselves exposure to that role, that script. And it can be very challenging, particularly because of also they're working with sometimes actors they've never met before they start shooting on the first day. You know, it's if you discuss that with aliens and said, how does that work? I said, well, I'm not sure, but we try it.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what it's like to look at something and then know you have to do that and do that on film.
Yeah, and trust someone, because, you know, the thing is, actors, particularly on certain roles, really have to trust the director and trust their fellow actors, and be very sensitive to them. And, you know, you're asking a lot of somebody, and I know that actors choose to do that role, but be actors, but it's still, you know, stressful.
As a producer, when you're sent a script, what to you in a script inspires you to say, I want to make that movie? As a WGA screenwriter, writers want to know.
I'm slightly different now, just because I tend to be involved in most of the writing of the stuff I do. The next 2 films I'm doing, I've written and co-written, but always the story. And particularly in this day and age, and people forget that as film students, it is a film business. And the business has changed radically in the last 4 years because of digital distribution, the demise of DVD. VOD has not established itself quite yet. So the numbers have dropped, you know, the budgets have had to drop to make the numbers work for investors. So, you know, it has to be a clever script. It can't be, oh, let's throw lots of money at it. You read the first line, helicopter crashes into Mount... No, you know. Next script, please. And one has to be realistic, and it's putting money on the screen that's the key. And if the writing has to be contained, generally I won't look at a film over 100 pages, just because of the budgets. You need to contain it, and I think 1 hour 40 is quite enough for any independent film.
Yeah.
And, you know, studio films are different because they can throw lots at the budget. You know, Marvel and all that, of course, they can entertain. But when you're talking about, you know, independent films, it's important not to overshoot, because you're better to spend the money on the 95 minutes you're actually going to have on the screen than 120 that you're going to cut down to 95.
So it's all about producibility.
Yeah, and realism and expectations, and producers and directors have to manage their expectations to what the market will stand in terms of budget.
Now, how do you know the difference between the script that is good to produce and then the one that is ready to shoot after you've reworked it with the director and the writer and they've had their say? How do you know a script is ready to go?
Very simple. When the money's there.
Okay.
No, but in real terms,
yes,
it's when the money's there, because, you know, when the money's there, everybody runs around to get it together.
That's right.
And money dictates the whole thing, and it's become harder. The market's become harder because over the last 4 years, pre-sales have disappeared for the independent film. So it's nearly all equity and tax credit. Now, the equities become hard. Tax credits in general, you're talking 25 to a maximum 30 in reality. It may look more, but by the time you get the amounts discounted because they're not you can't use them on the tax incentives. It's maximum 30, so you've got to find 70%, and that's nearly got to be pure equity. And The answer is you're ready to go when you've got that 70%, because you'll find a way. Obviously, it's dependent on the availability of talent, but you know, producing a movie is become a jigsaw with trying to fit pieces that aren't meant to fit, but you somehow managed to fit them in.
It's amazing because I hear your answers to these questions, and I know the answers directors use, and they're totally different. So as a writer, you have to hear what a producer needs versus what a director needs.
Well, I sit with both hats, but it's about realism. And, you know, I just sometimes look at people and I think, shall I tell them they haven't got a cat in hell's chance of getting this funded? You know, unless they've got an uncle that happens to, you know, be a billionaire. But if the market, you know, equity, investors are smart. And, you know, and the biggest issue actually isn't just making the film. Nowadays, equity and distributors even ask you how you're going to promote the film. And you say, hang on, I thought that was your job. But, you know, P&A has disappeared. You know, the kind of marketing spends have gone through the floor. They're not there anymore unless you're a studio. Studio will spend 50 million, of course, yes. But they've worked out the numbers with Marvel and they've worked out the merchandising numbers. But on a small independent film, how can you get it in the cinema?
That's right. And how are you going to get people to want to see it when publicity has changed so much?
And social media also is a big red herring to a degree. Yes, social media is important, but it doesn't necessarily translate to getting people to buy or watch.
Now, when you're producing a film, obviously finding the right director is key and integral. So when you don't get a big name director to jump on a project, how do you know you've got the right guy or gal?
It's tricky. You have to look at what they've done, even small things. I think the issue is, funny enough, it's not whether you think they're okay. Right. It's whether the agents are prepared to put their talent into it.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest issue, because if you can't attract the talent, the director doesn't attract the talent, then the film won't get made.
So are you a fan of getting talent sometimes before the director, or do you prefer to have the director before the talent?
You can't. You'll never get the talent before the director.
Yeah, I didn't think so, because you can't.
No, what I'm saying is, you know, it's also what the agents think.
Yes.
No, the talent will definitely want to know who the director is, and they'll read the script. And, you know, with a non-named director, the biggest issue is they'll often want the money in escrow. There becomes the big issue, that they expect you to raise the budget without being able to attach talent. So you've got to go to equity,
right,
and say to them, we're going to make this movie, who's in it? We're not sure yet. We'd like this, but we're not positive. Right. But you want me to put money in, right, not knowing who you're going to have in it.
And you have a director who's not necessarily going to attach himself to a project with that director until there's money.
No, it's exactly. Always been the biggest problem.
It is.
Chicken and egg.
Yeah. And that's why it's so hard to break in this industry into those higher jobs like directing.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you know, the famous saying about, do you know how to make a small fortune out of the film industry? Do you know how?
I would guess to
start with a large one.
Start with a large one. Okay. All right. Now, is it true that you were able to get them to shut down the Grand Canal in Venice for a film?
Yeah, we did a film with Pacino called Merchant of Venice, and with Michael Radford directing as Il Postino, who directed the Oscar with Il Postino. And we were very lucky in the cooperation, although filming in Venice is very hard, just because the families own. One family basically owns all the boats, so it's a kind of mafia operation. And you need to move anything, you've got to do it on a boat. So it becomes quite a logistical problem. But the mayor and the chief of police had dinner with Al, and were all over him, obviously. You know, Scarface, you know.
The Godfather.
Yeah, I mean, Godfather's return to Venice, you know, I mean, and being Italian, and they were so impressed having their photos taken with them and the kids, and that. They said, whatever you want, and we were able to, for a short period of time, do a shot that no other films were able to do, you know.
This is impressive. I'm going to read this because it's too long of a list. But in a celebrity-obsessed culture, you've produced films with everything from Academy Award-winning actors like Robert De Niro, F. Murray Abraham, Al Pacino, Kathy Bates, action stars like
Charlize Theron.
Oh, that's right. She has won Oscars.
For being ugly, which is crazy.
Yeah, so it must be so hard for her just to look in the mirror.
No, but if you talk to her again, Aliens, and said, "How does this business work?" Well, probably one of the most beautiful actresses in the world wins an Oscar for playing an ugly woman in Monster. Crazy business.
It is a crazy business, but you know what? It also people get excited about somebody playing something they're not.
Yes, and that's why she won.
Right. I also love the character actors you've worked with. Everybody from Harvey Keitel and Tim Roth to Jeremy Irons. So my question is what's been your involvement with getting names into films, and how do you do it?
A lot of luck, in a way. We, for instance, with Pacino and Merchant of Venice, he just worked with one of the producers in the team on the HBO series Angels
in America.
America, yeah.
That's right.
And we were able to circumnavigate CIA and get it direct to him. And we happen to know he always wanted to play Sherlock. He just did. And we kind of got him to agree it before we got the agents involved. Because I'm not just saying this because I don't know this, but the chances for he was offered, the agent would have said no.
Right.
Because agents just work on, they're accountants, they're numbers guys.
Right.
But he was so inspired to want to do it, and we didn't spend a lot on the cast because we spent the money on the screen.
Yes.
You know, as you know, producing a period piece is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, costumes alone.
Yeah, but wiping out things like telephone cables and signs and just doing all that, it costs a fortune.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some other ways you've gotten talent involved?
Obviously going through agents. I mean, you have a fine line of circumnavigating agents because they don't like you for doing that and they've got long memories. So you have to play that game with them. Obviously getting good casting directors as well who've got relationships is very important. I mean, casting directors do not underestimate that they've got inroads. Although they have a fine line between working for you and keeping their relationships with the agents because they have to go back on the next film too. So, they won't jeopardize those relationships. But finding clever ways of doing it, and I'd love to say I know the route to doing it, but there isn't a route, and it's got tougher.
Yeah.
Agents generally want to see the films fully funded, particularly an independent film, and without a talent attached, how do you get equity in, as I said earlier?
Right, because you can't guarantee anything if you can't offer numbers.
You can give them a wish list and say, look, we'll get approval before we go into production on the level of cast.
Right.
But, for them to put money into the bank, not just sign contracts, on a whim, kind of, it's terribly hard.
So how do you win over agents? Since they are the gatekeepers, and they are really the people that, if you can convince them, you'll get the talent, whether it's a director, an actor, a great writer.
You just have to keep at them, and obviously it's a fine line. You see them at the festivals and the markets, but it's getting tougher. I also think the agents are becoming a bit of a dinosaur, because in the new age of the Netflix and Apple coming in November, December,
Disney Plus, all this stuff.
In a way, they'll deal direct through lawyers. I think agents, we've seen it, agents are having a very tough time.
Yeah, right now they're having a conflict with the Writers Guild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's, and agents do make our job a lot more difficult. There's no two ways about it. And they've got more difficult. But there's a lot of agents closed, and got out because they can't, gone is the day where they can ask for telephone numbers in an independent film.
Right.
So you say I've got 600,000. That's it. They say we want $1 million. I haven't got it.
Yep.
And so they may not be working in 2 years' time.
It's a scary thought. What is your favorite story of producing films with a celebrity?
One that I can tell.
Yes, one that you can tell.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you a story that happened very recently.
Okay.
And it's not about a feature film. It's my first documentary, which I'm directing.
Yes.
And the reason I'm doing it is I got convinced to do it. And it's on a subject that I don't actually like, which is football. But it's a great story. It's about using sport to take street kids in some of the most vulnerable countries of the world away from fundamentalism. And we're taking the biggest footballers in the world to places like Pakistan, Nigeria, Syria, and opening academies and playing games with street kids who sleep on the street and take them away from fundamentalism. And when I heard about this, I said, you've got to make, and anyway, long story short, they asked me to do it. So we're taking footballers like Pele, Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Messi, Neymar, the biggest footballers literally in the world, Pele. I said I'm not particularly into football, and I explained that, and they said, no, we want you to do it because you're not into football, so you've got the right reason. But on the first day of the shoot, I was shooting over the next 2 years, in segments.
Sure.
And by the way, it's the first time I've got scared directing because I hadn't realised I hadn't got a script. So I met Ronaldinho, who's a legend, and he came to shake hands with me, and all its flunkies were around him and all the people, and I did warn them I didn't do football. I called him Ronaldo, which is about the worst thing you can do. Course. And like people were like falling over, like, oh my God, he's gonna walk out. And he just laughed. And he said to me, through interpreter, he said, I said, look, I'm sorry, I don't do really football. And he then looked at me and said, so we're going out for dinner tonight? I said, yeah. I said, so we won't be talking football? I said, no, we'll talk about film, he said. I said, yeah. He was excited because he's not doing another press release, a press conference.
Right.
Which I'm sure every time you meet somebody,
right.
What's your favourite player? What's your favourite kick? What's your favourite game?
Right.
You won't just hold a bit of paper and say, here's the answers.
Right. So you've written 3 separate books, one about acting, one about directing, and one about producing.
Yeah.
Now, what is it about the industry that you feel people just didn't get that you want to talk to them about and help them understand how to become better artists?
I wrote these, I've been meaning to write these books for some time. What the books really are about is the practical end of the reality of making film, not technical. Mm-hmm. So many books on producing and directing are written by people actually who are theorists and not practical.
Right, they're not people who work in the
so
business.
I give a lot of tips of things that I know work.
Right.
That I know win people over. I give a lot of danger marks of things not to do, and also coming at it from a new point that don't live in cuckoo land. The business has changed.
Yeah.
And practical tips about where you can save money and put money on the screen. Yeah. And also the fact you've got to now kind of reverse engineer a film. So when I pick up a script, I'll read it and I'll think this is worth about 2 million, 3 million.
Right. Regardless of the real budget.
How do you make it for that with talent? And that's what you've got to do now. It's no good just budgeting it and saying, I need 9 million to make this. You're never going to get it.
No.
So if you want to be in the industry, think out the box and be a realist.
Tell me about your real cinematic influences as a young man.
The directors that I can quote that I really think have made a difference in the last 15 years, which is the most important time because the business has changed. I mean, the idea of when they shot on film, it's so different to now. So right. Some of the relevance, I mean, people like Hitchcock obviously are great storytellers, yeah. But people like Ron Howard, who's made some amazing films. And I put that, it's interesting that the 2 directors I'm going to talk about, Clint Eastwood and Ron Howard, have one thing in both common, that they both were actors.
That's right. And that's where you came from.
Yeah, and there's a lot of directors, I think, who don't understand actors, who only concentrate on the shot. And one of the things I talk about in my book is the fact that, guys, it's about the audience will never really get excited over a great camera shot. They'll get excited about story and the performance delivering that story. Right. Oh yeah, the shots are nice, but they don't even think of the shots because they don't actually have a view on the shots.
Right.
So the cinematography really should be down to the DOP. In my opinion, the director has to concentrate on the performance.
Yeah.
And if you're an actor, you can understand that better.
Yeah, especially when you came from that world and that's how you
started.
started.
Well, yeah, and the other one that really wasn't an actor, who obviously we all know is a genius director, is Spielberg.
Yeah.
But I think that's the kid in him. I think he's a kid at heart, and has this vivid imagination.
He's still playing with that little 8mm camera he used to use to
And I mean, you
make
know,
trains crash into
he's
each
a
other.
genius.
Yeah.
But I think in general, I mean, you know, it's interesting. Clint Eastwood, what, 89? You know, he's doing films that are just incredible. You know, Sully, that about the plane crash on the Hudson, and American Sniper. I mean, what amazing performances in those. And not that I've seen him in action, but you hear stories in the industry how the actors love to work with him because he inspires them but lets them do their thing because he has that confidence in them.
What project are you looking most forward to doing next?
One I've written about, it's a girls' movie called One for the Girls, about a group of women at the age of 40. And it's really about reassessing the fact it's okay to be 40 now as a woman. It's kind of cool, where it used to be people were written off. And then the idea came from the lead actress who gave me the idea and wanted to do it, and I wrote the screenplay. And we've got a lot of celebs in it, stars. And it's quite fun, but quite serious as well, that it's okay to be 40 as a woman now, where it wasn't. It's kind of a modern version of a film called Shirley Valentine, which was a great film about a woman in the North and about being subjected. Then she went on holiday and didn't want to go back to having to make beans on toast on Monday and egg on chips on Tuesday, you know, that kind of life. Where, I think that's going to be really exciting, just because it's exploring, and in the current climate of where women are in the industry, I think it could do really well.
So, has filmmaking gotten easier or more difficult between going back and forth between America and Europe? Is one harder to make movies in than the other?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I think it just depends on, number one, the genre and the script and the stars attached. I think it's, funny enough, digitalization, the digital age, has made it, digital has done is made it more accessible to the new filmmaker.
Yeah.
Because they can buy a whole camera kit for 2,000 or 3,000.
That's right.
And
everybody has a 4K camera in their pocket.
Absolutely. And they, the other thing is that